Good evening. Welcome to Beth Israel, the West Temple, Triscuit Road in Cleveland. We're glad you're back with us this evening. We have a very special guest, the president of the Jewish Federation of Cleveland, Erika Rudin-Luria. We're just so happy to have you in our building.
Happy to be here.
We're going to have, I hope, an exciting discussion. Anybody that has any questions can certainly raise them through the YouTube app. Let's start with what I'll call This Is Your Life. Grew up in Syracuse.
Yes.
And then you went to Boston for school.
I went to Brandeis.
Tell us about that experience at Brandeis.
Well, growing up in Syracuse is a small Jewish community, and all of us, we had to drive a distance, most of us, to get to synagogue. And going from a school where I was one of very few kids that didn't go to Immaculate Conception before school in the morning, because Syracuse was very, very Catholic, to a school that was had a significant percentage of kids who were Jewish. At Brandeis was a big difference. But Boston is made for people between the age of 18 and 26.
Yes.
So I think any school in that area, as a college student, it's just a great, intellectually stimulating, fun place to be.
And a major in politics.
Yes.
Where did you think that might take you?
So I wasn't actually thinking about where it might take me. I was thinking about what were the courses I was most interested in. And there was a professor who taught civil liberties and constitutional law, who I found absolutely fascinating. And, in Syracuse, there were more doctors and lawyers per capita when I was growing up than there were anywhere else in the United States, actually. And my dad's an attorney and my mom is an RN. And I knew medicine wasn't for me, so I thought I'd want to go to law school, but really because of overnight Jewish summer camp and a series of other experiences that I had, I veered in a very different direction.
But you also went to a college named after an incredible Jew.
Yes.
The first member of the U.S. Supreme Court who was Jewish. One of the great civil libertarians this country has ever had.
Yes.
Did that play a role in your decision to go there?
When I visited Brandeis and I took the tour, they walk you around and there's a lot of symbolism on the campus, and they show you the three chapels, and they explained that regardless of where the sun is and what time of day, things are set up so that no chapel can cast a shadow on another one.
Wow.
And there's such symbolism within the buildings, and that held great appeal to me, the culture of it. And of course, I'm a fan of Supreme Court Justice Brandeis,
Yes.
and the work that he did. And the writings of his, I think that's pretty common in those of us that were attracted to the school.
And then you moved south to the Upper West Side. And what
Yes.
school did you go to there?
I got a master's in social work at Columbia University and a master's in Judaic studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America.
So did there come a time when you were actually thinking of law? Or how do we get from politics into social work, and then we'll go from social work into the theological work?
So actually, I was at summer camp. I worked up at Camp Ramon, Canada in Northern Ontario, and I loved camp. I had an amazing experience when I was there, and one of my campers told me about something that had happened in her family. And she told me about a cousin who had abused her sister. And I realized that I didn't have the skills to respond in the way that I wanted to. I did the right things. I reported it. We made sure that people were getting the assistance they needed, the social service assistance, the therapy, the legal assistance. But I realized that there were skills that I wanted to have. So when I went back to Brandeis, I joined the Rape Crisis and Sexual Assault Hotline, and I got involved in advocacy work, and that opened my eyes to social work. And then I had amazing mentors, again at Camp Ramah, who said to me, this whole, advocacy work and helping people that you're interested in and the Jewish community, you can put those together and have an amazing career. And it was really because of those role models that I decided to go to Columbia and JTS and to move to New York.
And how long were you in New York?
About 5-6 years. So at some point that seemed like a long time, and now it feels like a very short time. But half of my family is from the New York area. So I was going to a place that I had some familiarity with.
So let's take a moment to discuss something that you call role models, I call heroes.
Sure.
And I don't like to always tell people what I'm going to ask about, but I did tell you. But I like the idea of role models. I call them heroes. How hard is it to define what a role model or hero is for you?
I think that people are role models or heroes at different points in their life. I guess I've always looked at heroes in a much smaller way than the large, like Superman kind of hero, but more a hero can be the person who's taking care of something that no one else takes care of. You introduced me to someone as I was walking in who you said is the person who answers the phone at a synagogue. That can be a hero and a role model. A hero can be someone who's fighting adversity. The West Temple members who were working at NASA and were the first people to discover that their Soviet counterparts were lacking the freedom that they needed and that wanted to get out of the Soviet Union. I mean, those were heroes in that context. So sometimes I think it's the context and sometimes it's the person. On the role model front, though, I've always believed that you can learn something from every person that you meet. And so my grandmother, who was Roman Catholic, my mom is a Jew by choice, she's a convert. My grandmother, who I mentioned to you, if I was leading Adon Olam or Yigdal at the end of services, would come to services. And what she role modeled for my brother and I and for our family about what it means to be part of a family and to support other people and be open, that in and of itself, I mean, she was always a hero of mine.
So the idea, I think, is twofold, is to give and give back. Give to those you don't know. Mm-hmm. Give back to those who you do know that may need you at a later time. How does that fit into somebody who decides to go work at the Jewish Federation of Cleveland?
So I'll tell you what really pushed my decision over the edge to work for the Jewish Federation. Okay. I knew I'd be interning at the Jewish Federation in New York. It's called UJA Federation of New York. And the year before I was interning, I think 1997, 1998. So the world wasn't a scary place back then compared to today.
Got it.
And it was time for Super Sunday. They don't have it anymore in New York, but most people in Cleveland know the largest day-long dial-a-thon. And I was meeting a friend around the corner from UJA Federation to have dinner, and then we were gonna go to like the young leadership part of it at night, so it would be fun. And I wasn't particularly excited to go and make these phone calls. I mean, I was 22 at the time, so a long time ago. And I was walking from my apartment at 121st Street at that point because I moved every 9 months, I think, in New York when I was living there. And I was approaching 116th Street right in front of Barnard. So those that know, there are these gates right in front of Barnard. And there are always like 30 or so cabs at any given point in time. And I don't love subways. And I decided I was going to take a cab to meet my friend around the corner from UJA. UJA is 59th between Park and Lex. I was going to, I think, like 61st Street and something. I got into this cab and I leaned back to take a nap after I told him where I was going, which you should not do, obviously. And the cab driver said to me, "You know where you're going? It's near that UJA Federation building." And so I sat up and I looked at the person's name and I kind of looked around a little. I looked for a camera. I'm like, this has got to be a joke. And he said to me, "Do you know those UJA Federation people?" And I said, "Well, I've heard of them before." Meanwhile, I had a partial scholarship actually from UJA Federation. So clearly I knew who we were talking about here. And I said, "Why?" And now I'm wide awake, leaning forward and wondering if I should jump out of the cab. And he said, "Those UJA Federation people, they're such great people."
Oh.
And I said to him, and now I'm like sitting up and I'm leaning forward and I'm like, "Really, tell me why." And he explained to me how he came to this country in 1948, and they gave him a place to live. And those Federation people gave him food to eat and taught him English and introduced him to his wife. And today he's a cab driver and he can drive anywhere he wants to go. And he was telling me about his kids and his grandkids. And he was a Holocaust survivor and he had nobody. And those UJA Federation people were his family. And so while I would normally not believe someone if they told me this story, it happened to me where I happened to get into that cab on that evening. And I got out of the cab at the restaurant. Here I'm crying after listening to this man's story of his family that he had lost and then how he was able to create anew because of those Federation people, which actually meant not just because of like the Federation people themselves, but because of all of the volunteers and all of the donors and the person who met him at the airport and all of the, thousands of professionals and volunteers that needed to be coordinated to make that man's story possible. And I looked at my friend and I said, "We're eating a very quick dinner because something happened tonight and I need to be making these calls. I need to figure out how it is I can impact someone's life in the way this man's life was impacted." And so that's what really sold me.
That was a lightning bolt.
It was a lightning bolt.
Wow. That's a wonderful story.
Thank you.
So
It's, kind of
now that
crazy.
we can figure out how you found a way to aim to Federation work, how do we define what you do? Is there such thing as a job description? And was it what
Yes,
you, let's talk
there
about this
is.
first. What did you think the job description would be when they said, "Guess what, you're gonna have a chance to become the president of this wide, popular, big, strong, important organization"? What did you think it was gonna mean to hold that title?
Well, so I worked in Cleveland for 18 years at the Federation, and I had the opportunity to learn from and be mentored by Steve Hoffman. And frankly, there's no one better to teach someone that job. And Steve still is an incredible mentor to me. And he and Mort Mandel of blessed memory, really taught me about leadership and what it means to be a leader. And frankly, what's needed from leadership, I think, evolves over time. So I knew that that passion, values, intellectual firepower, I knew all of those things were important. We didn't know COVID would happen, obviously. I didn't have that. I don't have a crystal ball. But I had been running our planning area for a number of years, which is how I came to interact with the West Temple so much, because the area was focused on identifying the needs in the greater Cleveland Jewish community and working with partners to meet those needs. And that's my passion. And there's a history in Cleveland of presidents who were former planning directors. And so I think I knew very much what the organization was and what the position was. What I didn't know was the challenges as they would evolve. So, the massacre at the Pittsburgh synagogue was a few months before I took over as president. The increase of anti-Semitism, obviously the increased need for security, the crazy politics that we've dealt with and what that's done to civil discourse in our society, and COVID. So all of those things fall within the what I didn't know. I think that I was as well prepared by all of the role models that I had as I could be. I'd also say that one of the unique things about Cleveland is our very, very close lay professional partnership and our very close relationship with our synagogues and agencies. So there's never a moment where we're out there by ourselves, because it's actually not about us. It's really about the community and what the community needs. And we work with our partners in order to work to meet the needs of the community together. And that's really important.
So how many people work in that big building over on the east side?
So we have around 109 in the building, and then we have JFC Security LLC. That's another around 35 folks.
Are you in the building? If you're in town, are you there more than 5 days a week, or less than 5 days a week?
No, when I'm in Cleveland, which because of COVID is all the time right now, I'm in 5 days a week. Since COVID, we haven't had people in for events. And so when there were meetings or events on Sundays, and during campaign there frequently were, then it was fairly normal to be in the building on Sundays. Our building's not open on Shabbat, so I've never been in the the building on Saturday before.
And when we talk about in Cleveland, pre-COVID, and I'm not sure how much time that pre-COVID you've held the position.
A year. It was a year and 3 months, I think, before COVID.
So what percentage of the time is allocated to travel?
So I'd say that I'm more focused on why am I traveling or what am I doing when traveling. So it's not that there's a particular amount of time. If there's something, my number one priority is the Cleveland Jewish community. If there's something that I need to be doing to assist the Cleveland Jewish community or on behalf of the community, and that takes me out of town. So, similar to many rabbis in our community, I make Florida visits in February to part of the Cleveland diaspora, we'll call them. Travel to Israel. We have partners we work with very, very closely in Israel, the Jewish Agency. They're the ones that we get our Shinshanim from, the 18-year-old Israelis here for a gap year. We work with them on a whole series of different needs, and they are our primary partner. And so work with the Jewish Agency will take me to Israel. We have a partnership between Cleveland and Beit Shan and Emek HaMayanot, the Valley of the Springs. And that's not only Jewish Cleveland's partnership, but the city of Cleveland actually became a sister city of our partnership region in Israel, which we're very, very proud of as well. And so, and we have a partnership with St. Petersburg, Russia's Jewish community as well. So there are reasons like that. I think I'd mentioned to you this summer, I went to Israel twice. A small group of us were invited to go immediately following the ceasefire. The foreign ministry had reached out to Jewish Federations of North America, which is the national organization that we're a part of, and invited a handful of us to visit immediately following the ceasefire. So I was there at the end of May, And then we took a leadership group there in June as well for a few days.
So that the road to this may have been a question out of order.
That's okay.
Yeah, the road to the presidency, was that more because of an ambition to be president, or because the opening created an opportunity to be president?
I'd say it was about the ambition to make a difference.
Okay. And
I'd also say it was also about my love of the Cleveland Jewish community. There are many calls that all of us get from headhunters and folks who are looking for leaders of different organizations. The Cleveland Jewish community is very special. And my husband and I quickly realized that when we moved to Cleveland, and I wanted to, make a difference here.
yeah, priorities. That's an ever-moving word. Did the priorities change with COVID? For what you wanted not just what you wanted the Federation, but you wanted your office to partake in? Did COVID change that for you?
Some, sure. I think it forced us to really focus in initially on basic needs. So on March 9th, when my phone rang and...
20.
I'm sorry?
That's 2020.
Yes, 2020.
Oh, it's a
Thank
good year
you.
and a half.
Yes, on March
year-
9th, 2020.
Yeah.
I think it was like 3:30 in the afternoon when Seymour Kapelowitz, who's the former head of the Jewish Education Center, Rabbi later knows him well, and so does Debbie Chesson, called me to say that a member of his team had COVID, and that evening was Purim and
Oh my gosh.
Megillah reading, and in that moment, everything changed. I remember I called the Cuyahoga County Board of Health and said, this member of the Jewish community had been on a bus with like 36 other people. And so I called the Board of Health and said, what do we do? And they said, we're just figuring it out right now, because this is at the beginning. I mean, this is when there were the initial 3 cases. And they said, just give us the names of everyone that he was in contact with, and we'll call them tomorrow morning. And I said, no. I said, tonight is Purim. Let me explain to you what Purim is. And their heads like exploded. They're like, oh my, what do we do? I said, don't worry about it. Just tell us what to say. And we took the list, and I had my senior team with us. I remember I pulled them into my office, and then we scattered, away from each other, because we didn't know, what if one of us has it? And none of us who had a mask back then. And we took the list, and each of us took a segment, and we called every individual and said, this is what the Board of Health told us. This is what you need to do. They're calling you in the morning. And everything switched. We thought we'd be out of our building for 2 weeks. I mean, we didn't know, but our first concern was feeding people. So there's a Congregate Meals program that's funded by some government funds and by campaign dollars, where older adults would come together for meals 6 days a week. For most of these older adults, they're low-income older adults, this is, for many of them, their only time of socialization and the only hot meal they're going to eat. It's a very important program. It's run by our Mandel Jewish Community Center. And they couldn't congregate. All of those people were high risk. So immediately, our staff, in partnership with Jewish Family Services and the Mandel JCC, we worked to get food out there. We worked to get PPE. None of us knew what that was,
Right,
of course.
right.
But we worked to get PPE to the social service agencies. And our initial focus was on basic needs. And what is it that we need to do to flex ourselves in order to meet those needs within the community? And then we were able to begin to shift and be really intentional about what we would focus on and how we would assist. But it really depended on constant conversation with community members, with volunteers, with volunteer leadership, with the agencies, with the synagogues, about what everyone was seeing
Yes.
and what everyone was feeling, because it was all new. So whenever a question would emerge that was something that we didn't know, which happens all the time, we knew enough to say we're not experts, but we know experts. And so university hospitals and the Cleveland Clinic and Metro Health, all of them were featured in webinars very regularly by us. Different therapists and psychologists and school counselors and people who could help with how to talk to your children, how to deal with your children at home, how to handle your college student. What are signs of mental illness? What are signs of depression? So we shifted to focusing again. It's all about, meeting needs. It was just a focus on meeting needs through the lens of COVID.
And we end up with so many congregations.
Mm-hmm.
We get to Labor Day in 2020, and including Rabbi later, we're like, okay, we're not going to have High Holy Day services. We're not going to have Yom Kippur. We're not going to have Kol Nidre in the building. Sorry, stay home.
That was awful. Yeah.
That was an event that none of us could remember ever happening our entire lives.
It's depressing.
It was depressing. So I was very concerned. I was president back then of how are we going to keep our congregation united?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that the Federation heard about?
Sure.
Your own independent concerns, or did you also hear about it from congregations about what this meant to our ability just to remain viable?
Sure. Well, so remember, my husband's a congregational rabbi, so I think my hearing from congregations is probably a little different because I live with someone who works in a congregation, so that's probably a little bit unique to my role. I don't know that there are others of us in the country who have that. Not in the larger federations.
Okay.
But no, we were very concerned about it. Synagogues are exceptionally important to the Federation because they're exceptionally important to the Jewish community. They're a primary gateway institution. That hasn't changed, despite the fact that that so much about the environment around us has changed. And so we need our synagogues to be strong and healthy. And what that looks like today is very different, I think, than, 10 years ago. And then if it's pre-pandemic versus pandemic, we're concerned with making sure people are able to connect and engage with each other. We had always engaged with the synagogues, and I've spent time I've been to many meetings over the years of the Cleveland Board of Rabbis, and we had always engaged around data and research and what needs are you seeing, and the Jewish Education Center is so involved, here at the West Temple.
Yes.
But as we've seen how behaviors in the Jewish community have changed over time, we've been concerned about synagogues and the health of synagogues. The pandemic, which has allowed people to kind of hide behind screens, is very scary because we don't know what we're going to see on the other side of it. Zoom can't replace community. Zoom is wonderful when it can be used as another tool to build community, but if Zoom is all that there is to community, then that's a challenge.
So as we sit here today, we're 18, 19 months into this.
Crazy, yeah.
We do not in our temple have live services. As I mentioned, I think to you and as everybody have talked, we're becoming a temple with no walls.
Mm-hmm.
And are you hearing other temples have these type of immediate concerns?
Totally. And it's interesting. Some things about a synagogue with no walls, some things about that can be positive. I mean, the impact a synagogue can have, we did it with volunteers as well, making caring calls to members and checking in with them. At the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote weekly messages. People wrote back to me the open rates on emails have, not my emails, I don't see them because I get too many, but the open rates on the emails that we send out are enormous. They're larger than they've ever been. And again, people write back and people wanted to engage. And one of my staff was telling me today about calls he's made for campaign and how he's hearing about all sorts of medical issues that people have, but it's that people want to engage with another human being. So I actually think there's such an opportunity for synagogues right now, regardless of, not being in person, to demonstrate that they care and to be thoughtful and to demonstrate that they can be a caring community even when they're not face to face. Now, that's 19 months later, that's really challenging because people are tired and we weren't able to see people to see, they don't look so well. Is something going on with them? And that's what worries me, is that there are all of these events in people's lives, some really, really positive that we should have been able to celebrate together, and some where people have been sick and it's remained hidden, which has meant that we haven't been able to help people. And for our Jewish community, I mean, we're a group of helpers. Like, that's why
Yes.
we're all in this.
Yes.
And that's why I'm sure one of the things that attracted you to the West Temple is that it's a caring community.
It is.
And so not being able to show that you care is just really challenging. But I think that if we can keep up the energy around reaching out to people, that there are ways to demonstrate, that.
So let's change the subject for a few
Sure.
minutes. I always ask leadership these two questions. What are the current challenges for your organization?
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Sure.
think? What are the current challenges for your organization?
So outside of COVID, I think, anti-Semitism is a huge challenge right now. I think, as we talked prior to being on, I think part of the challenge around anti-Semitism is that people don't understand it. Most people that are out there don't understand that anti-Semitism is the world's oldest conspiracy theory. That in Charlottesville, when they said the Jews will not replace us, they weren't saying that the Jews themselves would replace them. They were saying the Jews who control the world and are out for world domination will replace us with black and brown people. And that the notions of world domination or control, whether it's, the Jews controlling the media or the banks or the weather or all of those crazy things, or dark money coming from affluent suburbs, like they're dog whistles, which means that we hear them and anti-Semites hear them, but a lot of our young adults don't hear them. My children don't hear them. And our partners in the general community, and we have amazing friends and partners throughout Greater Cleveland, they don't hear them. Intersectionality is supposed to help us understand that at the cross section of an identity, how someone's being Jewish and a woman, or being a woman and black, like how there's a compounding aspect to their identity. Instead, it's used as a way to justify anti-Semitism by many. And so we have a lot of education to do, and I fear that it really has to be one-on-one education. And how do you do one-on-one education with everyone out there? Forget the world, everyone out there in Cleveland, who I really believe are generally well-intentioned and really want to love their neighbors. And so anti-Semitism and security, I would say, are primary concerns. Pittsburgh is so close to us, and I was sitting in services that morning. I walked to shul, and I don't carry a phone. I didn't. Now, actually, I carry a phone with me on Shabbat. I just carry it turned off. And I was sitting next to Rabbi Melinda Mersak, who runs J-Hub, who's a good friend also. We were at a friend's daughter's bat mitzvah, and someone came in and told me what was happening, and that there was an active shooter in the Tree of Life building. And I remember taking Melinda's phone and walking out and calling Jim Hartnett, who I know was here, and Jim being in touch with all of the law enforcement to make sure that all of our buildings were secure. And I feel like in that moment, my life changed and everyone's life changed. 6 weeks later, I was part of the first group to walk into that building. And it was like any other chapel you walk into, except that on one side there were pews and sure, some dusty prayer books. And on the other side, everything had been torn from the ground. And you saw the cleaning materials still. And you saw that things were covering the bullet holes and the holes where bullets had been shot through prayer books. It was as, I've been to Poland before, and to think that you'd walk into a synagogue in the United States and have an experience that is something that most of us had wanted to believe was part of history.
Yes.
And so that is something that is pervasive on my mind. We feel responsible. We want to work with everyone in the Jewish community and in the general community and in law enforcement to secure our community, because we want people to come into the West Temple and all of our other Jewish institutions when it's not COVID and it's safe and all of that.
Yes.
And we want people to be able to live vibrant Jewish lives. And what's happening right now is terrifying.
So on that morning before I called Rabbi, my wife and I were walking in Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
We were walking in the battlefield, and I called my Vice President, Evan Fleischer. Maybe he's watching, and he was in Pittsburgh with his daughter, 3 or 4 blocks away when it occurred. And it's almost like a John F. Kennedy moment. Many people remember where they were when blank happened. And the only way to get through this is to never forget this, right? Never forget what
Right.
happened.
Right.
But we have to figure out a way to move forward on something that we work
No
on a lot
question.
here, anti-Semitism and it's the evilness of some people without any from our position, any logical part of
Right.
it.
Right.
To try to move things to a different
Sure.
area as we try to cover something, let's talk about the great state of Israel.
Sure.
How many times have you been?
I'm
More
not-
than
I'm
2
not
handfuls?
sure. Yes, more than 2 handfuls, yes.
And the last time was this summer
The
twice.
last time was in July, and before that in May. And my 18-year-old is there for the year before he goes to college next year.
So back in 1789 in this country, we had a constitution that began with the words, in order to form a more perfect union. And we've been almost 250 years now trying to become more perfect. We all know that we weren't perfect then, but under those standards, what they did was a good thing, and now everybody wants to take down Thomas Jefferson's statue. Israel, since 1948, surely has not been the perfect union. It's a miracle, right? When you get off the plane the first time, didn't you say this is a miracle? I remember when I did.
I still say it's a miracle. I mean, there's, we met in May after the ceasefire with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Benny Gantz and Naftali Bennett, who we did not have a clue was going to be the next prime minister.
Yes.
We met with a number of politicians and government officials, and we met with the people. And there's a stark difference between when I was there in May and July. In May, the isolation that they felt during the war with Hamas was palpable. they were aware that our kids were getting taken down on social media, that people were writing, "I don't like Bibi, therefore hashtag Hitler was right," and horrific things that didn't even pretend to only be anti-Israel, that were anti-Semitic. The 4,000 rockets that Hamas sent at civilian populations, from civilian populations, 1,000 of which fell in Gaza. The lack of reporting around how many of those 1,000 rockets killed children in Gaza. By the way, any child death, I think we should all cry over.
Of
I'm
course.
not actually.
Of course.
I don't have any, I think that's a human being, kind of thing. But they felt isolated. We met with survivors of trauma. We met with someone whose home had sustained a direct hit. We met with this amazing woman who is the director of the community center in Lod. She's an Arab woman, and she kept and Lod were the worst riots. She said it was, she was in tears telling us it was neighbor fighting neighbor in some cases, and agitators who had come in from the outside of Lod. She kept the community center open the entire time, and the riot didn't enter the doors, so that there would be a safe space. Okay, they were separate from each other, but for Jews and Arabs to be in the same space. She's a hero, by the way. No question, she is a hero. Fatan, she's amazing. But we got this picture of trauma on one hand, and on the other hand, when we met with then not Prime Minister Bennett and the others, and outside of Gantz and Prime Minister Netanyahu, they said to us that they were sitting down and talking to people, other politicians that they had never spoken to before.
Wow.
And I felt like we got a little bit of the foreshadowing of what that new government would be, because they said, we will do anything to move this country forward. And so then speed up, when Prime Minister Bennett spoke to the United Nations, there was a small reception afterwards in New York that I attended, and he spoke to the group, and he said to the group a handful of things that were very, very memorable. First, he said, the Jews have never been in power in the state of Israel for more than 80 years. We're there, just over a few years over 70 now.
73.
We're going to make sure that we're successful this time. I kind of got chills when he said that.
Yes.
Then he looked at the group and he said about the coalition government, we demonized each other before this. I demonized them, they demonized me, and today we work together on day-to-day items. They passed a budget this morning for the first time in 3.5 years. And that was holding the country back. And he said, and this is to me, regardless of your politics, there's someone in this coalition who everybody dislikes, that I know at least, because they are that diverse. And he said, look, the right doesn't have the monopoly on security concerns, and the left doesn't have the monopoly on human rights and social justice. We're committed to moving forward together. And I looked at that and said, wow, if only we could have people who disagree on so many things who were that committed to working through them together to move forward. And I was very, very inspired by that.
So I'll play devil's advocate for a moment.
Please, go for it.
We have, since 1967, a thing called a settlement. And we have areas of the land that, I remember his name was Menachem Begin, said Judea and Samaria. So he's going back 3,000 years. But can we have peace while we're still building settlements on the West Bank and Gaza, and we're still creating new...
So settlements aren't being built in Gaza.
I may be wrong. I'm not the.
No, Gaza is fully under Palestinian
Okay.
control. Unfortunately, it's
mistake.
fully under Hamas control.
Got it.
But there's so Gaza is not
And
doesn't have.
I apologize for
That's
that.
okay.
Can we have peace without the land issues being resolved? Let's put it that way.
It's a great question, and many people for many years, I think, have struggled with it. You know, I've read some interesting pieces by Micha Goodman, who is a thought leader in Israel. He wrote Catch 67, which I think is an excellent book, and he talks about how we need to find a way to shrink the security threats at the same time as shrinking the shame that a Palestinian has to go through every time they approach a checkpoint, and that you're in a situation where both allow things to spiral. And he's far more articulate, frankly, than I'm being about it. You know, I look at on the people-to-people level, and I look at groups like Shorashim, which is a group of Palestinians and Israelis that are working together. And when we've brought groups to Israel, many times we've met with them, and they talk about a number of different things, but they talk about how you need relationships, and that one of the challenges with the Oslo Accords is it actually separated neighbors from each other. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know your neighbor, it's much easier to demonize your neighbor. If you know your neighbor and you've got kids the same age, then in all likelihood they're playing on the street with each other, and they have a real like human relationship. And so I think sometimes decisions that have been made that have separated people have actually caused harm in those relationships. They also talk about how you can acknowledge someone else's identity and story without negating your own. You can hold both truths at once. So I guess I don't have a solution. I think a lot of the solution is with the people, not always with the leadership. And I can't speak to the current coalition government. I think it's far too new. I will say, though, Israeli politicians seem to be able to learn over time. Ariel Sharon,
Right.
no one would ever have dreamt that he, who was such a hawk and so far to the right, that he would be the one to pull out of Gaza, which was very, very painful for Israeli society. But because of Sharon, there are no Jews, there are no Israelis in Gaza. And so I'd say that leadership is needed. And leaders need partners. And so some of that will have to be like partners neighbor to neighbor, partners on the street. And there are real challenges in society right now.
But don't you
with
think,
finding those?
I also think that Israel's held to an amazingly high standard.
I'd say Israel's held to a double standard.
Well, I think it'd be a quadruple standard. There are an amazing number of countries that mistreat their own citizens, that mistreat their neighbors, that aren't kind, that do all kinds of, we could spend a week talking about it. Israel is the size of New Jersey, and you'd think we were the size of China.
And for frankly, Olive, so I'm a fan of Mati Friedman, who's a journalist who talks about this, and actually he's on the left in Israeli politics. He wrote an incredible book I just finished called Spies of No Country, which talks about the Jews from Arab countries and who were kind of pre-Mossad intelligence. And so much of it is the creation of the state through their eyes. And it's really, we so much know the Ashkenazi view here, the Eastern European, and not those from Jews that were expelled from the surrounding Muslim countries. But so it's a different perspective, and it's an interesting perspective. But he talks about the number of journalists focused on Israel versus China.
Right.
For example, Israel, though, the irony of it is, Israel has probably the only but gay pride parade in the Middle East. Israel, the social medicine pays for transitioning, like it's paid for. Israeli society on a social agenda is exceptionally progressive.
Yes.
They're security focused. They're exceptionally progressive across society. But there are honor killings if you are in the Palestinian-controlled territories, if a member of your family's gay, or and different things like that, that of course we would have an issue with here from a human rights perspective.
Yes.
And Israel has an issue with from a human rights perspective too, because Israel is very open and progressive. So I think there's a lot of inconsistencies in terms of who supports Israel or who doesn't support Israel, thinking that that somehow there's that there's a simpler solution to the current problem. And I wish I had a solution. All I know is it's worth working on. It's worth pushing forward towards. Israel is a very, very important component to Jewish identity. It's why we have the Gift of Israel program. It's why we encourage kids to go on Onward during the summer and Masa. It's why the Saltzman Youth Panel, which your young leader, Rachel Newman, is a part of, also looks at funding projects overseas, because the Jewish people, wherever they are living, are a concern of our community.
The biggest difference between Israel and all of the neighbors is that they're a democracy.
That is
and that
true
the vote,
also.
And the vote is protected, and the vote means something.
That is true also, yes.
Let's try to change the subject. What is the role of the Jewish Federation with the other faiths of the Cleveland area?
I'm glad you asked. So we have a very active and vibrant community relations committee and department that's really focused on making sure that we're always actively building relationships throughout Cleveland. But I'll say that that's like the beginning of the relationships. That's not where it ends. Part of it is that we're involved in United Way. We're involved in a normal time in the Cleveland Municipal School Districts. We run a public education initiative. We look for opportunities to partner throughout the community with different groups, with different faith backgrounds. We look for opportunities, frankly, to be part of strengthening Greater Cleveland. We're bringing 1,000 Jewish professionals to Cleveland as part of a large conference that Cleveland will be the host city of in May. We are thrilled to bring all of them to downtown Cleveland, where we will be spending 3 days together, because we want to invest in the city of Cleveland. It's why we were a founder of Global Cleveland, which we're very proud of the work that they're doing right now to help Afghan refugees. We look for a number of different ways that we're involved. We also run civic leaders missions to Israel, the Adler mission, and business leaders missions to Israel, which is really focused on the general community or on individuals and leaders from other faith backgrounds. And when we're there, we don't give just a camels and falafel version. We want them to see and to hear every different narrative. And if we think that there's a narrative missing, all they need to do is get into a cab, and the taxi driver there will tell them another, another story, because we want them to understand that Israel has many challenges, and that everybody is free to complain about them.
Yes,
Because
yes.
it's a democracy.
So when the president of the Cleveland Food Bank was here a year ago or so, Kristen talked about it wasn't just Cleveland, it was, she went all the way around all the neighboring counties. Tell us how wide a scope the Federation carries geographically.
So our federation, my geography, I'm going to miss angles, so you'll excuse me.
That's okay.
So we go to Hudson, so part of Summit.
Okay.
We cover a wide area on the west side. Oberlin Hillel is part of us. Kent Hillel is part of us. We share them with the Akron Federation, actually.
Okay.
But there's a federation its own federation in Akron, its own separate one in Canton, and its own separate one in Youngstown.
Okay. So you included would be our great friends to the west of Lyria and
Yes.
Lorraine.
Yes.
They're all part of
Yes,
this
yes,
as well.
yes, Yes.
And is it part of your particular job to literally be in these places? Is there actually time for you to do that? Is it something you
Well, so
try
honestly,
to do?
as planning director, I tried to do that.
Wow.
And but part of that, we're doing a population study. It'll be in the field, another one, it'll be in the field in the spring. I think Luis Fernandez may have been president the last time we did a population study, actually, because I remember having conversations with the West Temple, because we're able to splice the data to share where are young families, where are people in different parts of the community. So really, that population study and the demographic profile we get from it will also give us clues about needs in the community that we don't see. And then we'll dig further into it. But I really, what I see from the West Side Jewish community is really tremendous creativity. And I see it here, I see it in the Chabad, I see J-Hub, I know, has partnered with the West Temple,
Yes.
the Lakewood Jewish Alliance, and the West Tribe. And people see needs or see other people and they want to engage with them. And I think it just needs to continue to be nurtured, and that'll continue to grow.
So you can't talk about Judaism and buildings without worrying about the concerns of safety.
Sure.
And we know Jim Hartnett has been here, and the commander of the police department has been here. How much of the annual budget goes to the security, safety issues, do you know?
Well, so yes, we spend over $3.9 million on community security. That's outside of what any institution spends on their own. So as I think people know, we're right now towards the end. We're in the last 5 weeks of the Campaign for Jewish Needs. $1 million of campaign funds go towards security in our Jewish community. And we're getting the sign, we're getting the hook right now.
Not quite, but go ahead. Answer your question.
Oh, so 3.9 million.
Wow.
But I'll tell you, that's separate. I mean, our allocations, so last year we raised $33.1 million, and then another $15.6 million for the COVID relief. I know Debbie Chesson, the education director here, had spoken at a board meeting about the assistance from the COVID fund that's going to congregational schools. But most of the dollars that we're talking about on an annual basis really come from from the campaign.
Do we have questions, Deb? So before we finish, I found a wonderful quote. Supreme Court Justice Douglas talked about our Supreme Court Justice Brandeis, and I wanted to just read it to you and have you comment on it. Douglas wrote, "Brandeis was a militant crusader for social justice, whoever his opponent might be. He was dangerous not only because of his brilliance, his arithmetic, and his courage. He was dangerous because he was incorruptible." What does that say about how you started your life and where we are today? So blessed to have you in our leadership position.
Well, thank you. So I guess that I would say, I mean, I can't. I have a little too much humility to compare myself to Justice Brandeis, so I won't go there. But, you know, I was very, very fortunate to be raised by parents who really believed in family and community. And we always had a large table with people over. And I mentioned my family in Syracuse was part of a large Italian family, and but we had people of every different shape and background, and you always included family in everything. And my New York family, my dad was raised in an Orthodox home, and my New York family we were very, very close with also, and my grandmothers, who came from different walks of life, were closest friends with each other. I was raised in such a way where I thought that was normal. And so from that, I saw the possibilities in everything. And I was able to see family in a very, very expansive way. That hasn't changed. And I would say that upbringing has allowed me then, as president of our Jewish Federation, to see family and community in an equally expansive and embracing kind of way.
Wow. It's been an honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to get to know you.
We appreciate you coming in.
And you didn't even say that we went to the same overnight summer camp
I
years
wrote it.
apart.
We went to Camp Lakeland outside of Buffalo, New York. When we talked last week, we talked about that wonderful adventure.
Yes.
I was a camp counselor at the place she went to. So thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. And next week, we have Rabbi Litovsky coming in for an hour as well. Good night, everyone.